30, then you go to the next one, then the next one. You are actually training yourself to get bored with some of the most beautiful women on earth, and then you get married, and the high school guys will tell me, well, it's going to be neat when I get married, and this will be real. But they don't realize marriage is not the fulfillment of porn. Porn is the distortion of love. And so what happens when you get into the marriage, the wives are hurt because they can't live up to these expectations and these fantasies and the boredom that sets in with the men who've trained themselves in dissatisfaction. And to prove to you that this happens in the marriages, I have actually received several letters and emails from wives who are struggling with it at home. And they've allowed me to share these quotes anonymously with what they're going through. And I'm going to have the girls on the set read some of the excerpts of these letters. You know, maybe, you know, Tiffany, if you would start and just read one, and then we'll just go around. So.
Okay. I am no longer sexually attractive or desirable to him. He's more attracted to the women depicted in his movies, magazines, and websites than he is to me, and I feel completely unable to compete with these women.
Now, Helena, could you read yours?
Yeah. My husband of a little over 1 month is in love with pornography. I've tried to speak with him about it before, but I get nervous and flustered and end up nodding to whatever he says. He does not believe his indulging this desire is cheating or harmful or anything to be ashamed of. He knows I disagree with him, but I doubt he even begins to comprehend how devastating and heartbreaking it is for me. I pray for him and for us every day, but I don't know what else to do. I can already see his relationship with porn damaging other aspects of our marriage, especially in my behavior toward him. Thank you for taking the time to read and reply to my call for help.
I have been excluded, isolated, barred from intimacy with him. I have lost someone whom I thought was my best friend and most intimate companion in life.
Pornography tears at the very thread of a woman in her femininity. My heart was ripped and uprooted. It's as if I wasn't good enough, not beautiful enough, not thin enough, not exciting enough. Women get significance from their relationships with their husbands, and when he turns to another for satisfaction, it cuts her deeply at the core.
My husband began using porn as a teenager. What was once an adolescent hobby became the other woman in our marriage.
Me, I felt responsible, ugly, ashamed, alone, and even hopeless. Why would he look at another woman unless I wasn't pretty enough?
Now, you hear these quotes from these wives, and the husbands obviously are trying to write it off. It's her problem if she doesn't want me looking at pornography, but she knows it's a break in the fidelity. She knows that this is not the promise of faithfulness that he had once given to her. And this is why Christ tells us that if a man so much as looks at a woman with lust, he has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And I think when a lot of guys hear that, you just want to give up. It's like, well, what do you mean? I mean, well, check, please. I mean, I can't even look at a woman I committed adultery. It's impossible. But we've got to realize that Christ would not call us to live a certain lifestyle unless it was possible. The Holy Father says, that quote from John Paul II, where he says, if you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. The Holy Father says, do not be afraid that these words condemn you. Have confidence in their power to set you free. And so Christ can set us free. An example of this is in the early church. There's a bishop by the name of Bishop Nonus. And what happened is he was standing outside a cathedral with other bishops, and a prostitute dressed to kill was walking towards them. Now all the bishops simultaneously put their heads down. It's a prostitute, we can't look. But Bishop Nonus didn't. He looked intently at the woman. And as she walked by, he stared at her with purity. And as she walked by, he looked to the other bishops, and he said, did not her beauty delight you? Indeed, it delighted me. But how sad such beauty should be sold to the lusts of men. And you know what happened when the prostitute saw how he looked at her? She ended up coming back to the cathedral, and she found him. And she came back, she came to the Christian faith, she converted, and now we know her as Saint Pelagia. She's a canonized saint in the Catholic Church. There is so much power in the way that a man looks at a woman, just as there's so much power in the way that a woman presents herself to a man. And so I think that we got to realize that Christ didn't die on a cross so we'd spend the rest of our lives trying to avoid the sight of attractive women. Christ died on the cross so we could transform our hearts. And we've got to realize that when you want to be pure, it's not going to take away your sexual desire. You're going to still find women attractive. But what it does is it orders our desires according to true love. And so I remember seeing a men's magazine where the headline said, you know, the women we love. And it was just a smutty men's magazine. Are these really the women that you love? More often than not, it's just simply the women we lust after. And in his book, Love and Responsibility, the Holy Father explains. He says, a man and a woman, if their mutual love depends only on pleasure or self-interest, they'll be tied to each other as long as they remain a source of pleasure for one another. As soon as this comes to an end, the real reason for their love will also disappear. The illusion of the relationship will burst like a bubble. And he goes on. And he said, anyone who's capable of only reacting to the sexual values in a woman, he says, this person will always confuse love with lust. They'll complicate their own lives and the lives of others by letting the reality of love pass them by. And he speaks of responsibility. Love divorced from a feeling of responsibility is a negation of itself. It's egoism, meaning instead of I love you and I want what's best for you, it's I love me and I want you. It's an inversion of love. And he said the greater the feeling of responsibility for the person, the more real love there is. And so when it comes to pornography, Pope John Paul II is actually saying he wants you to love the women in the pornography industry. And you maybe say, well, that's easy. And I say, no, it's not. Mother Teresa said, love to be real, it must cost, it must hurt, it must empty us of self. So how do we love them? Well, one, you trash the porn. You don't get involved in that industry. If you're in it, you start to pull out and pray for these girls. In his book, Theology of the Body, the Holy Father, one of his best quotes I think ever, he said, God has assigned as a duty to every man the dignity of every woman. And so he makes demands on us. Before he became Pope, the Holy Father said Christ is found particularly in the field of sexual morality, because it is here that Christ makes demands on men. And when he makes these demands of love and sacrifice, a lot of guys, honestly, we pull back. I know I did. Well, you start to justify it. Well, why do my thoughts matter? I mean, I'm not doing anything with her. It's not that big of a deal. We rationalize. But why do the thoughts matter? Imagine if I said to Kristalina, we're driving in San Diego, it's quiet for a while. Hey, honey, what are you thinking about? And she says, oh, I'm just thinking about making out with this guy I saw at the gym the other day. I'd be like, what? You know, and she says, Jason, I'm not doing it. I'm just thinking about it. And I'm like, oh, you're not? Oh, okay, that's fine, as long as you think about it. I would have a right to be disturbed because the thoughts disclose the intentions of the heart. And where the heart is, that's where the soul is. Whoever wins the thoughts, wins the heart, wins the soul for all eternity. That's why Christ said, blessed are the pure in heart. They will see God. Turn it backwards, and if we're not pure in heart, we're going to have a lot of trouble seeing God, not just in this life, but in the life to come. And so what we've got to realize is that God is the one who created sex. He wants us to think about sex. You heard that correctly. God wants you to think about sex. Problem is, Americans don't think about sex, especially American men. Never think about sex. Especially young American men almost ever in their whole lives think about sex. Now, you probably think I'm a few sandwiches short of a picnic, but follow me on this one. The reason they're not thinking about sex is if we went to Pacific Beach, near where I live in San Diego, and I went to the beach, how many guys are thinking about sex? None. They're talking about it, they're joking about it, they're dreaming about it. How many of them are thinking about it? What is sex? Who created sex? What is its intention? Pope John Paul II said if you want to understand the meaning of our sexuality, you have to go back to the beginning. Because he said when God created Adam and Eve in the garden, that when Adam, we read that we're made in the image and likeness of God. So when Adam saw Eve's body, because of the purity in his own heart, it was her body that revealed that they're called to make a gift to each other. And by doing so, they would mirror the very love of God on earth. His love is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. And the love between the man and the woman reflected him on earth. Problem with porn, turns it backwards. It's not free. Not only do you have to pay for it, but it's driven by lust. Is it total? No, it's no gift of self. Is it faithful? No. Not only are you looking at hundreds of girls, millions of men are also looking at the hundreds of girls. Not free, not total, not faithful, and it's not open to life. It's not fruitful. It's entirely sterile. And so it takes God's plan for life and love, turns it completely backwards. So we just got to stop justifying as men. We want to look like a knight, but we don't want to bleed like one. So here when it comes to porn, where Christ makes demands, let go of it and let me teach you how to love a woman. If we can do that, then we will no longer be emasculated. We'll be the sons of God that the daughters of the King of Heaven need us to be. So stay with us, and when we come back, we'll talk about how to live this out. So we only have a couple minutes left in the show. We want to wrap up with maybe a couple tips that we can take home on how to live this out. So
I'd like to direct you to the Pure Love Club website again. And if you go to questions and answers, there's some really good tips on how to get out of this stuff and just apply that to your everyday life.
Kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch that I would recommend is first to get to the sacrament of reconciliation, not just when you fall, oh, I messed up, I need to go to confession. But believe me, we sin every single day. Try to go to confession at least once a month, maybe once every couple weeks, and find a good priest, a good holy priest, and stick with him. So that's one confession. Secondly is to get before the Blessed Sacrament, not just in Mass, but Eucharistic adoration. We need to have our eyes purified. There's so many memories, so many images that have been stamped in there. And they say, you know, you look at the girl for 10 seconds, and then it takes 15 years to forget what you saw. So we need to purify our eyes. And the third thing I would say is devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. We need our image of womanhood restored, and she is the